Ladies and gentlemen, there exists a phenomenon in human psychology so unsettling, so contrary to expectation, that it challenges our very understanding of the human spirit. I speak of those individuals we call empaths, souls who appear fragile, endlessly forgiving, the silent absorbers of pain. They walk among us as gentle companions, ever eager to shield others from suffering, even at great personal cost. Yet beneath their delicate exterior lies a tension accumulating over years, sometimes decades. Like finely tuned instruments, they register every dissonance in their environment. They notice the subtle tremors of anger before a storm, the quiet betrayals in a lover's eyes, the inconsistencies in a parent's affection. Outwardly, they bow, they apologize, they minimize their own needs. Inwardly, however, something remarkable and terrifying occurs. What observers often mistake for brokenness is, in truth, observation. These individuals do not merely endure cruelty, they catalog it. With clinical precision, they record the triggers, fears, and weaknesses of those who wound them. Their suffering becomes study. Their silence becomes archive. They grow into unwilling custodians of a dark library, the psychology of their oppressors. And then one day, something snaps. The empath ceases to function as society's shock absorber. They stop diffusing the violence of others into themselves. Instead, they awaken. In that moment, all the pain, all the silent note-taking, all the unspoken understanding of human cruelty fuses with a deeper, darker reservoir within. The shadow. This is the most terrifying transformation to behold. For the gentle hand, once trembling, now holds the scalpel of truth. The quiet gaze becomes unflinching. The one who once absorbed all wounds becomes the one who can expose every hidden fault line in the human soul. The awakened empath wields knowledge as power so acute, so exact, that it unsettles even the seasoned psychologist. And here lies the paradox. The kindest among us are not weak, they are restrained. Their gentleness is not the absence of strength, but its careful containment. When the dam of containment breaks, when empathy marries shadow, we encounter an archetype that both terrifies and inspires, the awakened one. Such individuals no longer play the victim's role in the collective drama. They embody transformation itself. Their awakening demonstrates a principle as old as humanity, that light without shadow is incomplete, and that wholeness emerges not through denial, but through integration. The day the empath snaps is not the day they become cruel. It is the day they cease to be deceived. It is the day the emotional shock absorber becomes the mirror in which abusers are forced to see themselves. That is why this transformation unsettles us. For in their awakening, the empath teaches us a lesson we would rather avoid. That suppressed truth, once unleashed, carries the force of 1,000 silences breaking at once. So I ask you, what becomes of society when its gentlest members awaken to their power? Perhaps this is not merely a psychological case, but a warning. Perhaps the future belongs not to the oppressors who dominate, but to the empaths who finally refuse. The empath's vessel is one of the most paradoxical psychological realities, for it appears on the surface as fragility, but in truth it conceals a structure of immense psychic tension. From earliest years, such an individual often finds themselves appointed without consent as the bearer of collective pain. Within families, it is the child who absorbs the grief of an alcoholic father, the unspoken resentment of a neglected mother, the chaos of siblings who enact what parents refuse to face. In society, it is the colleague who softens conflict, the friend who listens without speaking, the partner who sacrifices their own equilibrium for the storms of another. They are shaped by circumstance into vessels, containers for that which others either cannot or will not carry. What makes this role so insidious is that it is largely invisible. The empath is rarely acknowledged as the one absorbing the overflow of human dysfunction. Rather, they are seen as sensitive, anxious, sometimes even weak. They themselves often adopt this narrative, mistaking their exhaustion for inadequacy. Yet beneath the surface, something profound is occurring. In every sigh they swallow, in every apology they utter for existing, they are conducting a silent alchemy of psychic pain. Their nervous system becomes the laboratory in which the unresolved emotions of others are processed, broken down, and stored. The tragedy of this condition is that the empath comes to mistake the burdens of others for their own. They internalize the sadness of their mother as if it were their sadness. They interpret the rage of a father as if it were a flaw in themselves. They feel guilt not because they have sinned, but because they have absorbed the guilt of those around them. This identification with collective pain is not conscious, but instinctual, as if their very being were tuned to the subtle frequencies of suf, fearing, and so they go on carrying year after year a weight that does not belong to them, while those around them remain blissfully unburdened. To call them vessels is not to imply passivity. On the contrary, their receptivity requires a constant vigilance, a hyper-awareness of moods, silences, and shifts in atmosphere. They are perpetually attuned to the needs and dangers of the environment, like weather instruments forecasting storms no one else notices. This heightened perception comes at great personal cost, for the empath is never at rest. Even in solitude, echoes of others' pain reverberate through them. It is tempting to romanticize such sensitivity as a gift, but to do so is to misunderstand the depth of its toll. To be a vessel for collective pain is to live in a state of chronic displacement, where one's own emotions are drowned by the floodwaters of others. Yet paradoxically, it is precisely this accumulation, this quiet endurance, that prepares the empath for transformation. For when the vessel can no longer contain what has been poured into it, something radical must occur. The empath does not remain forever broken under the weight. The same role that condemned them to suffering also positions them unknowingly to become the site of a profound psychological revolution. The hidden shadow within the empath is one of the most misunderstood aspects of human psychology. To the outside observer, the empath appears as a delicate figure, soft-spoken, apologetic, always ready to soothe rather than confront. Such individuals are often dismissed as lacking the resilience or the hardness required to survive in a world that celebrates dominance. Yet beneath this gentle exterior lies a reality that contradicts every surface impression, an unacknowledged reservoir of rage, knowledge, and survival instinct that has been cultivated silently over years of suffering. What appears to be weakness is often a mask, not consciously worn but formed by necessity. The empath learns early that open confrontation is dangerous, that resistance invites greater punishment, and that survival depends on appeasement. So they bow their head, they smile when they are hurt, they say, "I understand," when they have been betrayed. But this performance does not erase the truth of what they feel. Instead, it drives those emotions into the depths of the psyche, where they remain untouched by daylight yet alive and growing. This subterranean region is what we might call the shadow, the dimension of the personality where everything denied, suppressed, and feared is stored. The empath's shadow is unlike that of the aggressor. Where the aggressor's shadow is made of impulses repressed by social order, the empath's shadow is forged from experiences of chronic injustice. Every humiliation, every betrayal, every sacrifice demanded of them becomes sediment in the unconscious. Over time, this sediment forms a bedrock of potent emotion, anger at being silenced, resentment at being taken for granted, fury at being exploited. And yet, because the empath fears becoming like those who hurt them, they refuse to express this anger outwardly. They continue to present themselves as harmless, untamed, aware that they are housing within themselves a potentiality both powerful and frightening. What makes this hidden shadow so formidable is that it is not chaotic. It has been accumulating in silence, shaped by years of observation. The empath does not merely absorb emotions, they analyze them, whether they realize it or not. They learn the contours of cruelty, the rhythm of manipulation, the predictable patterns of those who abuse power. This means that when the shadow finally demands expression, it does not emerge as blind rage, but as precision. The empath knows, often better than their abuser, exactly where the fractures lie. Their shadow is informed, educated by suffering, and sharpened into something dangerously accurate. To understand the empath is therefore to confront a paradox. They appear gentle, but their gentleness masks a strength not yet tested. They seem pliant, but their compliance conceals a memory that never forgets. They act as though powerless, but in truth they are like archers waiting for the right moment to release the string. The shadow is the secret weapon they do not even know they possess. This is why the empath cannot be reduced to victimhood. The hidden shadow makes them more than passive recipients of abuse. It renders them potential agents of transformation. For when that shadow is integrated, when the empath ceases to deny what they carry and acknowledges the fury, the insight, the strength that lives within, the transformation is seismic. What was once concealed becomes the force that redefines not only their own life, but the balance of power in every relationship they inhabit. It is this hidden shadow lying in wait beneath the mask of kindness that unsettles psychologists, for it demonstrates that the gentlest exterior may contain the most dangerous of interiors. The systematization of suffering is perhaps the most startling discovery in the study of empaths, for it reveals that their endurance of pain is not passive but profoundly structured. On the surface, the empath seems to merely absorb the blows of life, anxious, apologetic, forever justifying the cruelty of others. One imagines them as broken vessels, shattered repeatedly until nothing coherent remains. Yet when examined more closely, one sees that their pain is not scattered, but organized. Rather than collapsing under the weight of abuse, the empath often transforms their suffering into a system of knowledge. They become archivists of cruelty. Every insult, every betrayal, every episode of rage leaves an imprint in their psyche, and they store these imprints with an accuracy that rivals scientific observation. This pattern is not deliberate in its beginning. It emerges because the empath must survive in volatile environments. When a parent's moods swing unpredictably, the child learns to watch for the subtle signs, the tightening jaw, the shift in tone, the silence before the storm. When a spouse is unfaithful or manipulative, the empath notes the micro-expressions, the inconsistencies in story, the rehearsed excuses. To others, these signs pass unnoticed, but to the empath, whose survival depends on anticipating harm, every detail is absorbed and categorized. Over years, this accumulation of data forms a map, not only of specific individuals, but of human behavior itself. What unsettles psychologists is that this mapping is not the product of conscious strategy, but of necessity. It is an unconscious systematization, like a scholar building a library without intending to do so. By the time the empath reaches adulthood, they may carry within them an astonishing catalog of human weaknesses, patterns of manipulation, cycles of abuse, and strategies of domination. They know what triggers anger, what provokes guilt, what reveals dishonesty. This knowledge is rarely spoken aloud, for the empath has no wish to harm, but it exists in them as a latent power, one that can alter the dynamics of any relationship should they choose to wield it. The disturbing truth is that such systematization means the empath has not been destroyed by abuse, as is often assumed. Instead, they have been studying it with the patience of a silent witness. Their wounds have not blinded them. They have sharpened their perception. Their depression is not merely collapse, but a kind of internal archive of what others refuse to see. And this is why, when the empath eventually snaps, the transformation is so shocking, the archive opens. All the knowledge accumulated in silence, all the patterns carefully observed, suddenly crystallize into conscious awareness. What was once endured passively becomes an arsenal of understanding. This capacity challenges the conventional narrative of victimhood. To suffer is not merely to be diminished. In the case of the empath, it is to become a reluctant student of darkness. Their pain becomes structure, their silence becomes memory, and their endurance becomes insight. The empath is not only the vessel of others' emotions, but the cartographer of human cruelty. And when that cartography is finally laid bare, it becomes clear that the empath has never been simply broken. They have been building, waiting, and preparing for a moment when the system of suffering transforms into a system of power. The awakening of the empath is one of the most radical and terrifying metamorphoses that can occur within the human psyche. For years, perhaps decades, they have lived as a vessel of pain, as an absorber of chaos, as an unacknowledged archivist of cruelty. They have endured the storms of others while silencing their own thunder, convincing themselves that this is the price of love, loyalty, or simply survival. Yet, the psyche has limits. A container cannot be filled indefinitely without spilling over, and a soul cannot be burdened endlessly without consequence. When that threshold is reached, when the empath can no longer contain what has been deposited into them, something ruptures. This rupture is not destruction, it is awakening. To the outside world, the moment appears sudden. One day, the empath is quiet, apologetic, deferential. The next, they stand with a clarity and force that feels almost otherworldly. But in truth, This awakening is the culmination of everything they have carried. It is the moment when the silent archive of suffering fuses with the repressed shadow, creating an entirely new orientation to life. The empath ceases to view themselves as the sponge of others' emotions and begins to see themselves as the mirror that exposes truth. Their posture shifts, their language sharpens, and their perception, once turned inward to absorb, now radiates outward to reveal. This transformation unsettles because it overturns the expectations we hold about kindness. We believe that those who are gentle will always remain so, that those who forgive endlessly will continue to submit. We expect them to collapse, not to rise. Yet the awakening proves otherwise. When empathy integrates its shadow, the result is not the perpetuation of weakness, but the emergence of a power that is both precise and uncompromising. The empath no longer avoids conflict. They confront it with unnerving calm. They no longer internalize blame. They place responsibility exactly where it belongs. What once looked like fragility is revealed to have been restraint all along. This moment of awakening is not vengeful in the crude sense. The empath does not suddenly become cruel, nor do they delight in the suffering of others. Rather, they gain a kind of lucid vision. They see patterns with such clarity that deception becomes impossible. They hear lies with an ear so trained that manipulation collapses at its first attempt. They possess the ability to unmask those who once relied on their silence. In this way, the awakened empath becomes not merely an individual transformed, but an archetype, a force that alters the psychological ecosystem around them. It is no wonder that such awakenings terrify. For those who once dominated the empath, the shift feels like encountering a stranger who knows every weakness, every secret, every fracture in their armor. And for society at large, it is a reminder that no system of oppression can rely forever on the compliance of its shock absorbers. The moment of snapping is the moment of reckoning. It is when the softest voice speaks with the authority of accumulated truth, and when the one most underestimated becomes the one most undeniable. This is not collapse, it is emergence. It is not the death of the empath, but the birth of the awakened one. The dual nature of kindness reveals itself most starkly in the lives of empaths, for they embody a truth that unsettles our usual assumptions about strength and weakness. To the unobservant eye, their kindness appears to be softness, even fragility, a disposition too gentle for a world built on conflict and competition. They forgive when wronged, they excuse cruelty, they sacrifice without demand for recognition. Yet this surface impression conceals a profound paradox. Their kindness is not the absence of power, but the deliberate restraint of it. What others dismiss as weakness is, in many cases, the disciplined containment of forces that could, if released, alter the balance of any relationship or community. To understand this paradox, one must recognize that kindness is not a default state, but a choice. For the empath, kindness is often exercised in situations where cruelty has already been endured. It is not naivety, but persistence, a conscious decision to absorb rather than retaliate. This decision, however, is not made because retaliation is impossible. On the contrary, the empath often possesses an intimate knowledge of how to strike, how to wound, how to dismantle another's defenses with unnerving precision. But they withhold. They hold back, not because they lack the ability, but because they sense the destructive implications of unleashing what they carry. Their kindness, then, is not emptiness. It is containment. This containment, however, is easily mistaken for submission. Those who exploit the empath's kindness interpret it as weakness, assuming that the forgiving soul is incapable of defiance. They grow careless, certain that the one who always bends will never stand. This is the tragic miscalculation of abusers, for they fail to grasp the reservoir of power concealed beneath the gentle exterior. They do not see that every act of forgiveness, every instance, of silence, every decision to walk away rather than retaliate, is not weakness, but discipline. It is the discipline of someone who knows their own destructive potential and chooses, again and again, to restrain it. But restraint has its limits. When the empath awakens, when their kindness ceases to function as a shield for others' cruelty, the dual nature becomes visible. Their gentleness, once assumed to be the whole of their being, is revealed to be only one side of a greater totality. The other side is sharp, discerning, and utterly unafraid of confrontation. They can expose lies with disarming clarity, dismantle manipulation with surgical precision, and hold a mirror to the darkest impulses of those around them. In this moment, the paradox becomes undeniable. kindness is not opposed to strength, but is its most refined expression. To be kind in a world of cruelty requires a power that cruelty itself cannot comprehend. This is why the empath's dual nature terrifies. It unsettles not only those who have abused their patience, but also society at large, which prefers to believe in simple categories, the weak and the strong, the gentle and the fierce. The empath defies such binaries. They show us that the kindest among us are often the most formidable, that true gentleness is forged in fire, and that mercy is never the absence of power, but the mastery of it. To stand before such a soul is to realize that one is not in the presence of weakness, but of a force so disciplined, so deliberate, that it could destroy yet chooses to heal. And that is why their kindness, once awakened in full, commands both reverence and fear. And so we arrive at the inevitable conclusion. The story of the empath is not one of fragility, nor of endless submission, but of transformation. What began as a vessel of suffering becomes, through silence and observation, a keeper of truth. What appeared as weakness reveals itself as restrained power. And when the moment of awakening comes, when the shadow is no longer denied but integrated, the empath ceases to play the role written for them by others. They stand instead as something wholly other, an awakened one, no longer merely absorbing pain, but transmuting it into clarity, precision, and strength. This end is not an end in the ordinary sense. It is not the collapse of the empath, but the collapse of illusion, the illusion that kindness is weakness, that gentleness is submission, that silence is ignorance. It is the beginning of a new archetype, one that unsettles abusers, challenges psychologists, and forces society to reconsider its assumptions about power. For the most terrifying truth is this: those who were thought to be the weakest were never weak at all. They were weapons in waiting, forged by suffering, tempered by restraint, and awakened by necessity. The day the empath snaps is not the day they are destroyed. It is the day they are revealed, and from that revelation there is no return.